Hello, and welcome to You Can Grow Your Own Way, a conversation for parents and carers of neurodivergent children. I feel so privileged you are taking time out of your busy life to learn all about the ways to interpret neurodivergence for you and your child. Remember, all advice on this podcast is general and may not specifically apply to your child, so we encourage you to also talk to your GP, paediatrician or specialist to see if what you've learned will help your family. Hello, and welcome to You Can Grow Your Own Way, a conversation for parents and carers of neurodivergent children. Today, we're going to be talking to Holly Karten, and we'll be discussing explaining your diagnosis to family and friends. Holly is an AUDHD woman who lives and works on Gadigal Wongal land of the Eora Nation. She is what's called 2E, too exceptional, a definition which we will come to in a future episode. Holly is raising two daughters as wholeheartedly and consciously as she can, whilst navigating the barriers of a world that wasn't built for them. She's a primary school teacher, artist, author and illustrator, and is looking forward to releasing her neuro and disability affirming debut picture book, Coco Loves Chaos, very soon. You can view more of her work by visiting her website and following her on Instagram. We'll pop those details in the show notes. We're greatly looking forward to an incredibly passionate conversation with Holly. Good morning, Holly. So great to have you today talking to us about announcing your diagnosis to family and friends, which can seem like a really daunting experience. I'm really excited about our conversation. I've been having a look at some of our talking points today, and it's full of lots of lived experience and lots of genuine tips and tricks and essentially an understanding of what this moment's like for parents and carers. So I think it's going to be a really beautiful and valuable conversation. I would love for you to start by introducing sort of your daughters and your life so everybody gets a bit of a vibe for where you're coming from. Would you like to start there for us?
Speaking of introducing my daughters.
Hello. Speak of the small little devil. Hello.
I have one of my daughters home because she just couldn't with school today, so I had to go and do an early pickup. Anyway, hi. Hi, Carly. Nice to meet you. I'm Holly, and
I'm Kate.
That's that what we're going by today? Okay. We also have another daughter who is Kate's older sister. Hey, Dylan, are you going to sit here nice and quietly, or would you like to? You want to be part of it? Okay. All right. Come on then. Here we're going. Authenticity.
See, lived experience, this is what it is. We don't get to sanitize our life from our kids. It's just not how it works. So, no. Kate, it's awesome to have you on here as well. Thank you for joining us.
There we go. So, basically, we are just an all-round neurospicy. Hey, sweetheart, I really want you to be part of this, but you can't if you're going to be doing things that try and bring the attention back to you by smacking me and blowing on my face and things like that, then I won't be able to do my best job. So are you sure you want to be in here? It's going to be a long time, or you just needed a little hug top up? Okay. All right. I think that's her decision then. All right. So this is my life. I've totally forgotten what the question is now, but that's probably...
that's so fine. We're introducing your beautiful neurospicy family.
Well, there you go. They've introduced themselves. But I guess for the other thing worth mentioning is that I come from a long line of neurodivergent women. But, of course, we're only just figuring that out now. So... like many people, you start with looking at what's going on for your children, and then you're like, we're all this way. But it's sort of funny and exciting. My mum and I have been playing a game of hindsight, like, realizations that you were autistic before you knew you were autistic.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, it's quite funny. I think my favourite one so far was when my mum said to me, who's 70, she was like, "Oh, I just realised that that's probably why I only ate porridge and peas for a year once." I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Oh, light bulb moment.
Yeah. My favourite.
And for those who are listening, Holly had a school cart this morning, so she got the phone call from school, which we've probably all experienced, for the collection, and we do it because we love them and we know they need it and we know how overwhelming school is, but, you know, it throws our day out of whack and you got to kind of recalibrate and work out what to do. So I'm thrilled that you're here, because sometimes it's just too much of a challenge. So I think you're doing brilliantly.
Thank you. Yeah, no, actually, it was a perfect neurospicy morning in many ways, because so my husband, of course, is away for work. So, you know, that's always the, you know, first big change is that, like, the girls wake up and something's out of whack because Papa's gone off to Melbourne. And then I was at school longer than normal because I was delivering social stories, because there's a school disco on Friday. And being Queen, if you haven't thought to include them, I'll bloody well include them myself. I had to make social stories for all the children that might need them and deliver those to all of the classes. So I'm there until 9. I literally walk in the door, get the phone call to come back. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So in my head, it was like, oh, great, I've got this podcast coming up. I'm going to take time to, like, wash and dry my hair and do my makeup and all those self-care things I really struggle to do. Yeah. The hair has not been washed. Anyway, that's okay.
You did a great job for being thrown a curveball and turning up and being here. So I think it's fabulous.
Yeah. Well, I feel like one of the joys of discovering our neurospicy families and leaning into, like, that authentic version of life is that you just, like, you do tend to find other people that are just like, yep, feeling you, and you just move away from the people that have all their shiny togetherness together, and you can all just be real with each other and just go, look, yeah, this is my best version of me today, you know, and that's as good as it gets, and that's okay.
We're going to have an upcoming episode that talks about social setting and how you find that some of your former family and friendship groups kind of move away, which can be a really big challenge and it can cause a lot of grief. But one of the amazing things is when you actually find that community that you vibe with and gets it, and those relationships suddenly are so much more enriching and you feel like you don't have to justify yourself. So there's real power in that too. And I look forward to when we get to that conversation, because I think that it can be very complex. It can be very overwhelming and quite daunting, but when you come out the other side of it, it can also be one of the most beautiful things that can happen. So, yeah, I feel you there completely.
Yeah.
So look, we did come here today to talk about diagnoses and sharing it with family and friends, which does actually connect into that conversation actually quite well. So I'd really love to sort of get your views around that, your experience, sort of your hints, your tips, your tricks. I know that you had some things to say around expectations from social media. So would you sort of like to share that with us?
Yeah. I think that so there's all these wonderful things about neurodivergent TikTok and Instagram and, like, all of these conversations that are happening. There's so many neuro-affirming speakers on there that are helping us to understand ourselves better and our children better, and to understand that we're different and not less. But it can also then create this shock when you come face to face with the real world and you mention the A word and people go, oh, and you're like, what? Oh, no. And they'll be like, oh, so you're a person with autism. Like, no, I'm autistic, but like I can still have a conversation. and we kind of get set up for this massive dissonance between like, oh, why everyone on my Instagram is saying like, they're loud and proud about who they are and the world is loving and accepting them. And when I do it, I'm getting that. It makes us, again, think we're doing something wrong. So I guess my feeling is just that I really want people to know, and parents to know, if you feel nervous, if you are not sure about how to tell people or who you want to tell, that's okay. Like, that's normal. That's an appropriate response. And it's not because you're ashamed of your child's diagnosis or your diagnosis. It is not to do with that. It is a realistic and real assumption about whether the receiving partner is ready to hear it or not. We get told a lot that as neurospicy people that we're not good at reading other people's cues, but that's not the truth. We're actually hyper aware of how safe we are in a situation. And so if our feedback is going, this actually isn't a safe place to disclose, you are allowed to make that choice and wait until you do feel stronger and safer. And I just, like that, I've had to learn that along the way, where by experiencing times where I'm like, oh, ow, that really hurt. And in hindsight, I'm like, there are places where I knew I could safely go with that information, and places where I was more tentative. So start with the safe places. Start with a neuro-inclusive group where you can be like, hey, this is who we are. Get your strength up by getting positive reinforcement before you start going, oh, okay, well, I've been given this diagnosis, so that means I now have to. Yeah. That's really my biggest takeaway, like from my years.
I think that's an incredible point about, it's almost like working a muscle, isn't it, Holly? It's almost like, because the reality is that we probably find, I find that we have to do a lot of justifying and educating because there is so much miseducation out there. And so you can find, and sometimes it's from the people that you actually thought you were closest to and therefore would be the most compassionate, but they may be ill-informed. And so often when you share information, you are dealing with their presumption that they have received around what your diagnosis is and having to re-educate them about the reality of what it means from a day-to-day experience, and that it's not necessarily, it's not to say that sometimes there aren't challenges. There are always going to be challenges. If you went to China and you didn't speak Chinese, it's going to be complicated. If you have a neurodivergent brain and you're in a broadly neurotypical environment, you're going to have your challenges in being able to feel like you can accommodate to that space and other people can accommodate to you. But it doesn't have to be viewed as something that has this negativity associated with it. And it's almost unfair how much educating I think that we have to do when we share this information, but it's really, really common. Have you found that in your journey as well?
Absolutely. And I think that by and large, it is, the extra, it's the mental load of figuring out who is safe to disclose to, who is not safe to disclose to. And it's often carried predominantly by women and mothers. And, that's just issues with our society, and unfairly far more than, me in my privileged situation of being sort of outside, being the primary earner for our family. I have had the opportunity to be able to go, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there that this is who I am. But if I was, still kind of worried about whether employers were going to understand that or not, I might not feel as safe. And so, people who have historically been part of more oppressed groups, women, people of colour, people who have experienced institutional trauma, if they are not ready, and then that's, I just don't want anyone to feel like they are letting down the neurodivergent community because they're not ready. And, but I think if you can, it helps. It helps adding our voice to, hey, like there's lots of neurospicy people in the world and we're not scary and we're not hard to be around. We just feel things a bit differently, and here's some very easy ways that you can adapt what you're doing so it's not always us adapting to meet your needs.
Yeah, the average statistic sits at around 2 to 3 kids per classroom have some level of neurodivergence. And so when you think about that, it's really not that unusual. And we should actually feel comfortable turning around and saying, this is my need. These are the things that overwhelm me. These are the things that I find challenging, but these are also the things that make me feel really comfortable. These are the things that help me feel happy. These are the things that feed my dopamine in a really great way so that I can sit in my class and feel like I'm part of you. Because that's the flip side to a diagnosis as well, is being able to advocate for yourself and say, here I am, and here is how I am happy. And I think that that's a really, really beautiful and powerful thing to be able to share.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't find children are never, it's never difficult for children to communicate about their needs, and the other kids are just like, yeah, cool. It's always, with older generations, with the adults, that it's a little more iffy. But kid to kid, they're just like, yeah, great, you're autistic, you're ADHD, blah, blah, blah. And also because I'm the mum that comes in and talks about all these things with the kids, I know everybody's diagnosis, so it doesn't matter if you think that your child hasn't told everyone, they've told me. They'll come over and they're like, I'm dyslexic. I'm like, cool.
That's so cool. I love that. My Mr. 8 this morning, I asked him if he could put his socks and shoes on while we were waiting for his porridge to cook, and he normally does it after breakfast. And he goes, Mum, I can't do that. It's out of my routine and I need a schedule because I'm autistic. And I was like, more power to you, buddy.
I love that so much.
Thank you for being your authentic self.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And that's the thing. Like if we can find a space where we can talk about a diagnosis and our children are having these conversations in their classrooms with their peers that aren't negative, then we've got a beautiful generation that's going to be growing up being a whole lot more accepting than we are.
Yeah.
And when we get to that position of being able to share our diagnosis in a positive light and in an affirming way, we're feeding that back down to our kids as well, so that they know that this is just who they are. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that's taken over them. It's just who they are.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your notes about coming out to your dentist. I was wondering if you'd be willing to share the story.
Yeah. It was, oh my God, talk about, okay. So I'm going to go back to basics before I start the story, which is, the social model of disability, because if parents are new, they might not have necessarily thought about this too hard. But the social model of disability is basically that, there's no reason that, for example, using a wheelchair is less good than walking, right? It's just that our society is set up so that it assumes most people walk. And so you are disabled by the fact that you can't get up the stairs. You're not disabled by the fact that your legs don't communicate with your brain. So my incredibly disabling experience at the dentist. I already hate the dentist because I just, like, it's the noises, it's the smells,
it's a sensory wonderland.
Lighting, it's the having it all, like, up in my space. Like, it's just, like, I actually feel like I'm getting, jittery just talking about it. But so I had been avoiding the dentist for far too long. I think it had been 4 years or something, like, between checkups, because I just kind of gotten to a point where I was like, of all of the medical appointments that I have to go to, because I also have a medically fragile child, I just cannot stomach one more. Anyway, so my husband just was like, oh, you know, I'll get a recommendation from a friend who works in dentistry, and, you know, you can go to this person who's been highly recommended. So I went, okay, I'm going to give this a go. A new practitioner. And it said, any conditions that you would like us to know about? And I wrote, I'm autistic. So then dental assistance takes me through into the dentist's office, and I'm sitting in there, and, like, for starters, like, the environment, right? Not only is it just the regular whole dentist thing, but it's like toilet cubicles where the walls don't go all the way to the ceiling. So I could hear all the noises from the other dentist rooms. And I swear to God, like, it was like there were like 6 other dentist rooms. I'm like, what is going on here? So there's like all the dental noises, all the smells. And so I'm just sitting in the chair, and then, of course, he's taking a while. So then I start to kind of get a little bit panicked, and I'm like, okay, just breathe. Anyway, he walks in and he looks at me and he goes, hello, Holly. I burst into tears, right? And then, of course, because then I'm crying, and I'm like, and so I can perspective take. I can see from his point of view. He thinks he's being kind and accommodating, and he's like, I hear you don't much like the dentist. And I was just like, but because he was behaving like that, I couldn't access my words to be like, I can speak. Like, I understand what you're saying. I'm not stupid. I'm autistic. Like, you're not like, stop. I'm not a child. Like, what are you doing? But I couldn't do that. So then I'm there this whole time, like, you know, with him doing all the dentist thing, just like so totally locked up and in my head of like, how do I approach this situation with this person who is completely, like, assumed all this stuff about me simply by one word? How do I address any of this? That it was so overwhelming that I just, like, ended up, you know, suffering it all through the appointment, and then leaving and crying, and, of course, never going back. And in hindsight, I'm like, okay, that was an incredibly educative experience, because I see people do it to my daughters, and they are so much stronger than me, because they'll just look at them and they'll be like, I can talk. Like, and then the other person will be like, oh, sorry. But yeah, I was like, this is the reality of, sometimes it is like that, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes people are great, but sometimes it is like that. So, you know, it's okay.
And to provide some compassion to Holly for the way that she reacted, I just want to share, especially for the parents and carers who are new to the journey. So in that environment, Holly's received, like, someone's spoken to her in a way that actually makes her feel threatened, misunderstood. And so what's going to happen is your fight or flight response is going to go on. You're going to automatically become dysregulated. Your cortex is going to switch off because you're working with the lower section of your brain, and you're not in a position to be able to defend yourself, which is completely unfair. So if you ever see that, parents, happening with your children, that's because that top part of their brain has literally just switched off, because someone's just made them feel like they don't belong. And yes, it's an educational experience, but as crap, you had to go through that.
Well, I mean, but the reality is that even if I was nonverbal all of the time, somebody speaking to you like that is never acceptable. Like, I see it happen to friends with a cerebral palsy, where somebody speaks over their head to the carer. It's like, talk to them. Like, just assume that you can talk to a person directly, always assume competence, and if you need to be corrected in another way, not by going over somebody's head. It's no different from talking directly to a husband with a wife in the room, and we wouldn't stand for that in this day and age. It's the same thing.
And because we're all about busting down myths and barriers here as well, it's a really great that you mentioned nonverbal. There's a huge presumption that nonverbal automatically means that you've got an intellectual disability, and that is not correct. In fact, only about 30% of people who are nonverbal actually have an ID. It's just that the wiring in their brain didn't connect to speech. They can completely understand you. I'm sure they'd love to answer you with words. They're just not capable to. And it's not about speaking slowly. It's about giving them a safe environment with other ways that they can communicate back with you, whether that's sign, whether it's body language, whether it's providing them with an assistance device. They're not stupid. They just don't have the wiring that tells their brain how to make the words, and they're not the same thing.
Yeah. I would also like to clarify that when I say I'm not stupid, like I have like people with intellectual disabilities, I would not call them stupid either, right? Like we are all on a spectrum of neuro.
No.
Yeah. And some brains are. I also think that the thing is about having an intellectual disability is so often people with intellectual disabilities are actually more attuned to things that more neurotypical people miss out, right? And we'll probably, as we do more and more research, find out actually the way that we've been typecasting this intelligence thing is quite misinformed. It's just really about where your brain's energy is being occupied. And there are times of the day where I'm non-speaking. Usually, like if the exhaust fan is going while I'm cooking and it's 5 p.m. and everyone's screaming, like I cannot access words. And it is so much easier if someone says to me, "Where's the plate?" or, and they want me to give them verbal instructions to find something, can't do it. Like I will just have to go and be a meat puppet and go and get it. And that's the time of day that I refer to myself as, Mama's in meat puppet mode. I cannot talk.
Huge tip for parents at that time of the day as well, because I think it's pretty common because kids are all worn out and exhausted. There's lots of house noise going on. They've had school, so they're running around bonkers, loops, flares, whatever you do. There's really great ear apparatuses that can help diminish some of the noise. They may not necessarily work for you, but they're certainly worth giving a try, and they're a very affordable option to give a go.
I've tried all of them and none of them have worked for me. It's really disappointing because I love the concept and I think it would help, but I'm really sensitive to the sensation of having something in my ears, and also it turns up my internal noises. So then I can hear all of my footsteps and all of my breathing and So it just, for me, it's like which overwhelm would I like to experience? And sometimes it helps just to have a break, like to switch over. But unfortunately they don't actually help reduce it for me.
Please. And that's fair. And I suppose that's the journey of neurodivergence.
Yeah.
It's testing and finding the things that work for you because it's not the same for everybody.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And realizing that you're not broke.
Not at all. Not at all. I loved a conversation that you wanted to have here about being able to find spaces actually on the internet that you can use to actually bolster a bit of that self-esteem. So I'm guessing we're talking about things like Facebook groups and spaces like that. Would you like to sort of share that a bit more?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, it can be, listening to podcasts that are neuro-affirming or, being in Facebook groups that are carefully selected as to, does this leave me feeling better about who me and my family are or worse? I have also like a WhatsApp group with 4 other mums who all have similarly very complicated family situations, and just having, because they talk about like comparison being the thief of joy, but there's also this thing about being able to communicate with other people who get it is so affirming. Like, rather than to be talking to somebody who you're like, oh, I just had like this massive fight with my husband about soap bottles, and they go, oh no, I've never had one of those fights. That's no. And that just goes, oh, great. So now I'm also a terrible person. Instead of, them being able to go, yeah, what's it with leaving all the empty soap bottles? Why can't I fill them up? It's like you need that. You need someone that goes, yes. Also, we need to work on our regulation so that we're not yelling about soap bottles.
We also need the spaces that let us share like the micro moments of joy as well. So when we see things that other people may not necessarily find challenging, and whether it's our little person or ourselves, and we're like, oh my God, they just did this thing and they've never been able to do that thing. And I know it seems really small that they just put their socks on their own, the right way round, but that's amazing. And to have other people go, yeah, that's amazing. Those things help really build us too. Yeah, completely. I hate the phrase find your tribe, but it's kind of the summary.
But they used to refer to those little moments of things that perhaps regular families wouldn't, or normie families, as I like to call them, wouldn't get. Their smile stones, which I've adopted as.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm adopting that too, a smile stone. That's so gorgeous. What a beautiful descriptor.
Yeah, because, like this whole milestones thing, when you've had a different experience, it makes you feel sick. But milestones, I'm all about them. We have lots of those in the day.
Oh, that's awesome. That's absolutely excellent. There's something I've highlighted here in your talking points, and I think it's a really good point for us to kind of share before we maybe wrap up our conversation, and that is that you don't have to disclose.
Yeah.
So the thing I'd love you to chat about in regards to that, and it's a little, not a question, but a little definition that's floating around in my head, is finding the balance of disclosing, not disclosing, and feeling comfortable being authentic versus feeling you need to mask. So navigating, and that's a big question, I know, but navigating that line, how have you, for you and your family, found that you've navigated that journey?
Okay. Well, first of all, I need to explain that my eldest daughter has visible disabilities. So we have always, since she was born 9 years ago, we haven't had the option of masking, in terms of we've always drawn extra attention because we're the family that's walking with the kid in the walking frame, or that kind of thing. So, and she's medically fragile and she's had all these additional things. So we are out there whether we want to be or not. So,
yeah.
Having experienced that and our high level of visibility, I early on felt very compelled to disclose everywhere, because it was like, well, if I'm not disclosing my difference and she doesn't have the choice, then I am somehow betraying her or letting her down. So there was all this extra sort of emotional weight to my experience of her. But I was also still in that phase of every time that somebody rude came over and said, what's wrong with her, or, why is she using that, or something that people do say. And if you haven't experienced it, it's hard to believe, but people do say stuff like that. And as well-meaning as they might be, it's rude, right? And so I was still in the phase of going, oh, okay, I just have to educate these people, you know, like I will have a conversation with them and help them to become more accommodating. But after a while, I started to realize that my one conversation with this person is not going to change their ableism. It's not going to impact how they move through the world. It might have the tiniest little grain of something, but more than likely they're just going to go, oh, well, she was rude, or, you know, like take absolutely no learning from our interaction. But the person who sees me do that day after day is my daughter. She's looking at me, hearing somebody speak rudely about her in her presence, like she doesn't understand, and then me being kind and tolerant and smiley and making them feel okay with the situation. And after a while, I started to wake up to the fact that no, actually, it is more important for me to model to my daughter that she should expect people to treat her with respect. And so I changed my approach and went, when people say things like that, I'm going to respond not rudely, but assertively. And, you know, being someone who struggles with that, I had to practice at home and script it and be prepared. So that when they came over and said things like, oh, why does she have that thing on her head because she wears a cochlear implant? Be like, what's your name? Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Holly. This is my daughter. She wears a cochlear implant, but she has a name. You want to come and say hi first? And then they would, you know, particularly if it was a child, right? They would like end up getting distracted and just like making friends and all of that. And then like the cochlear implant thing was sort of like, oh, whatever. They'd move on. But
inconsequential. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the often experienced life of somebody with a visible disability is that they're constantly having to make normies feel comfortable with them before they can then just be treated like a human being. And the rest of us need to catch up, do a hell of a lot more work about just going person to person. One of the side things that I do is I do some communications for a brand named Halo, which is run by Santi, who is blind and uses a guide dog. And he, everywhere he goes, has to remind people about the way that you're not supposed to interact with the guide dog. The guide dog is working and it's distracting, and, you know, everywhere he goes, he has to educate before he can just get on with the business of working. So it's not only the fact that he has the difficulty of not being able to have the same cues that everybody else has, but he also then has to do the labor that we should have all done by knowing those things in order to make the world more accommodating. And when it comes to the neurodivergent space, we all have a job to do, which is the things that work for neurodiverse children and adults also improve the lives of neurotypical people. That's the reality, is that having spaces that are thoughtfully designed, it makes the world better for everyone. So let's all just start doing that work. And then no one has to disclose unless they feel like going, oh, yeah, you autistic? Oh, yeah, me too. And the reality is there's a lot of us, and they're finding out that there's more and more of us. And once your kids get to school, if you're in the very early days, you're going to look around the classroom and you're going to be like, oh, yeah. And you're going to pick out 5 for sure. Not all of them will know. But just go and talk to those parents and don't be like, oh, what's yours got? Because they might not know yet. But they are going to be people that are just handling all the
like
things.
you don't ask someone if they're pregnant. It's kind of the same rule.
Yeah. But the thing is, they will end up being your friends. Like, they will, because you'll all be like sitting in the corner being like, oh, can we go yet? At the assembly or whatever it is. And it's okay. It's just its own culture.
I just want to summarise a couple of beautiful points that you popped in there to make sure people take the gems out of that, because I think there's a couple of things there. I think the first one is how you've really encapsulated how much our kids, we create their inner voice. And so standing up for them in front of their presence, being positive about what they have, seeing them as an individual are the voices that they're going to generate within themselves. And that's amazing. I also love that you also talked about the added mental load and exhaustion that comes about from the presumption that we should need to educate people about ourselves, our inherent selves, instead of other people maybe taking a step back and saying, is there something I should be doing? Can I educate myself about this situation? And also that additional point, and it's really clear in classrooms, it's a beautiful place to talk about it. You know what? Every kid benefits from a 20-minute brain break.
Yeah.
So there is no harm in looking at ways that we can make spaces feel more comfortable for people who feel those things probably just more obviously and more externally. It doesn't necessarily mean other people aren't feeling them as well. And so we can support each other in ways that actually benefit everybody rather than feeling like it has to be a particular strategy for a neurodivergent child in the class.
Yeah, I sort of think about neurodivergent people as being the canaries in the coal mine. Really, we just let everybody know sooner and earlier that the things we are doing don't work for human beings. And, it can be really irritating and uncomfortable to be told that the way that you've always done things actually isn't that great and that you need to think about maybe doing things differently. And there are some people who are going to be open to that conversation and some people who are not. Do not waste too much time and energy on the people who are not. Spend time fostering those relationships where people are open to the change, because that is going to bolster you when you are forced to deal with people who have to change because it is impacting and damaging. Like somebody who has a direct relationship with your children or is responsible for educating them, you're going to need your advocacy energy for those people. But when it comes to your relationships, if somebody is making you feel bad, you don't have the emotional energy for it. It's okay to focus on the relationships that are nurturing you.
Oh my goodness, Holly, could you have come up with a better way to end the podcast? That's fantastic. That's such a great summary. And I think that's a really great lesson for all of us for life. I mean, whether we're actually, to be completely honest, whether we're talking about neurodivergent relationships or neurotypical relationships, if the relationship doesn't fill your cup, the relationship probably shouldn't exist. And I think in those spaces where we're obviously dealing with a lot more, we're unfortunately dealing with a lot more negativity and judgment, it becomes all the more important to make sure we're surrounding ourselves with positivity and support. So I feel so privileged that we've had the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. I love that your little 6-year-old popped in. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and it just shows how real our lives are. And that we are talking to real people who experience this every single day of their lives. It's the reality of their lives. That's why we're here. We're having this conversation. So, Holly, the deepest, most grateful thank you for your time today.
Oh, thanks, Carly. I'm really, really looking forward to hearing all your other interviews as well. And yeah, it's always exciting to hear Australian voices.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Be sure to check the show notes on our website for any links and references. You can find us at youcangrowyourownway.podbean.com. And if you found this episode helpful, we would love you to help us get the word out. You can share the podcast, tell a friend, and be sure to click the follow or subscribe button so you can access all our new episodes. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, where we would love to connect with you. You Can Grow Your Own Way recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of this place, now known as Australia. We're coming to you from Jabberung, Jawajali and Wadawurrung country, the country of our guest speaker, and from wherever you are listening. We respect the elders of the past and present, and we share our friendship and kindness.